I remember reading a story in Alphonsus Rodriguez's book. He wrote several volumes on the practice of perfection, the Christian virtues and the practice of perfection. They're classic books of Catholic literature. And he has a lot of stories in those books, and if you know me, you know I like stories. I'm always telling you some story. But this story had to do with a man who was at the brink of despair. He had lost his fortune. He basically felt like his life was over, and so he was going to kill himself. But fortunately, he talked to a priest, and the priest advised him to go to Mass every day. Go to Mass every day. And he did, and the man was greatly comforted by this fact. He went to Mass, and he felt strengthened by the Mass. But he needed it every day. He needed every day to sort of make a new start. I'm going to go to Mass today, and with our Lord, I'll be able to get through the day. That's how much despair had a grip on him. If he didn't go to Mass, he felt like he couldn't make it. Well, he would always go to the same priest. He always went to the same priest for Mass. And one day, this priest went to an ordination. And so he wasn't there. And the man arrived for Mass, and he found out Mass had been canceled. And of course, what happened? Despair began to take possession of him. And he started to panic. And some people said, well, why don't you go? You can go over to this other village where the ordination is taking place. And so as he's on his way to this village, he meets a peasant, a poor man coming back. And the poor man tells him, well, you know, Mass is already over. I'm sorry, you've missed it. And this businessman is now just beside himself, and he's saying, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. Today might be the last day of my life. What's going to happen to my soul? And the poor man says, maybe he's thinking this guy's crazy, but he says, you know, what are you making such a big deal about it for? He says, I'll tell you what, I was at the Mass, and I'll trade you. I'll give you the merits of my Mass that I attended today in exchange for your cloak. Obviously, the poor man felt like he was pulling the wool over this man's eyes. But this man was happy to do it. He said, oh, you'll give me the Mass that you attended in exchange for my cloak? Sure. And he takes his cloak off and he gives it to the man, and the poor man goes off laughing. Well, the businessman now is very happy and satisfied that he feels like, you know, it's just like I was at Mass because I got the merits of the Mass from this other man. And then later on, it was discovered that this poor man had killed himself. That the only thing people could figure out was that the despair that had been in this businessman now entered into the poor man. And without the benefit of the Mass that he had so foolishly traded away, much like in the Old Testament when Esau traded away his birthright for a pot of stew, in the same way this poor man did not appreciate the value of what a Mass was. And so once he made that exchange, the temptation that was in the businessman now entered into this man, and he was overwhelmed by it and killed himself. What a terrible story that is, but it's certainly a lesson for us to remember that the Mass is of such value that you cannot compare it to anything else in this world. It is so valuable for you to assist at a Mass. And so never come into Mass late. Never allow yourself to be so neglectful that you would come into Mass after the offertory has begun. Otherwise, you've missed Mass. Now, if it's not a Mass of obligation, of course you still can go to communion, because you weren't obliged to go to the Mass. But if it's a massive obligation, you cannot go to communion unless you're going to attend another Mass, because you have committed a sin in coming late. Now, here, imagine if you were going to go to the 7:15 Mass and you were so late for it that you showed up after the offertory had already begun. You'd have to stay and go to the 9 o'clock Mass. But if you come to the 9 o'clock Mass and you show up late for that, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to be like the man in the story I just mentioned. You should be beside yourself that you were not able to attend Mass that day.